This was an event dedicated to freedom of speech that was supposed to bring together members of both parties with members of the press. And in a certain way it did, because the fact that they just unified, I saw a room that was just totally unified. It was in one way very beautiful.
For a moment, some thought there might be a reset. In the hours following the shooting at Saturday's White House Correspondents' Dinner, Trump struck a somewhat somber tone. But then within 24 hours, Trump reverted back to usual form, and any restraint seemed short-lived. He was back in a combative posture by Sunday. In an interview with CBS 60 Minutes, Trump repeatedly attacked the anchor Norah O'Donnell personally, and the media more broadly, for the act of asking straightforward questions about the shooting suspect.
He writes this, quote, "Administration officials, they are targets." And he also wrote this: "I am no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes." What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was waiting for you to read that because I knew you would, because you're horrible people. You should be ashamed of yourself reading that. You're a disgrace. But go ahead, let's finish the interview.
The other thing that he wrote in
You're disgraceful. I'm not a king. What I am, if I was a king, I wouldn't be dealing with you. We have some great people in the press, some very fair people, and people that are just on my side. But for the most part, it's a very liberal or very progressive, let's use the word liberal press.
You'll recall that in the days leading up to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the reporting suggested Trump had already planned to lash out against the press. According to the Daily Beast, quote, "Donald Trump will launch a revenge attack on the White House media when he confronts them in person at a Washington dinner on Saturday night, then flee before there can be revenge." The event was, of course, evacuated before any such speech could take place. In his remarks following that evacuation, Trump admitted he had planned to be inappropriate and rough.
I was all set to really rip it. And I said to my people, this would be the most inappropriate speech ever made if I said one. So I'll have to save it. I don't know if I could ever be as rough as I was going to be tonight.
And Trump already announcing that he wants to reschedule the event, though organizers aren't so sure that's going to be possible. Earlier today, Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt blamed Democrats and the media.
This political violence stems from a systemic demonization of him and his supporters by commentators, yes, by elected members of the Democrat Party, and even some in the media.
Missing from that press conference, any moment of self-reflection from the press secretary serving a president who has described political opponents as garbage, scum, demonic, animals, the enemy within, and low IQ, whose election-related conspiracy theories have led to death threats against election workers, whose administration pushed rumors that Haitians were eating cats and dogs. This as Trump is now reviving his feud with late-night host Jimmy Kimmel, calling for ABC to fire Jimmy Kimmel over a segment that aired Thursday night in which Kimmel staged a parody White House Correspondents' Dinner, roasting the president and the administration, as comedians have done at past events. Here's the portion that Trump and the First Lady seem to be referring to.
Our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow. You know, Melania's birthday is on Sunday. That's right. She's planning to celebrate at home the same way she always does, looking out a window and whispering, "What have I done?"
That joke was obviously written and performed before the events of Saturday night, but it's now landing, of course, in a very different political and social environment. Trump calling for ABC and Disney to immediately fire Kimmel, calling the segment, quote, "far beyond the pale."
This so-called White House press secretary wants to lecture America and lecture us about civility. Get lost. Clean up your own house before you have anything to say to us about the language that we use.
That was Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries responding to Karoline Leavitt's criticism after Saturday's shooting. And joining me now is David Folkenflik, media correspondent for NPR, and Molly Jong-Fast, contributing opinion writer with the New York Times and MS Now political analyst. It's great to have both of you guys. So, Molly, I want to start with you. You were at the dinner for part of that evening, but you weren't there when the shooting unfolded. But you have a sense of the room, the history of this event, the tension, of course, leading up to that night. When you see the president's rhetoric that we've seen, and there have been shifts in it just in the past 48 hours, what is the impression that you are left with here? Is there a serious grappling with the nature of political violence and everyone's role in it right now?
Well, I think there are two problems that are separate. One is the problem of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is at best looks the optics on it are pretty terrible, and they always have been pretty dicey. The idea that you have members of the government and journalists and, and lobbyists and all sorts of D.C. swamp all together in a room very dressed up. And then I think it's worth realizing, we are in a very heightened moment in American political life, and people are mad. But people are mad at journalists and politicians and everyone. And so I think it's important to sort of pull back and say none of this is happening in a vacuum. And I think that the anger that the American people have towards politicians is also sort of spilling out on journalists, and why it's so important that things like the White House Correspondents' Dinner probably don't happen anymore. And that, we raise that money for those scholarships in other ways, because I think that as much, our job is to cover these people. And at this moment, it really needs to be as clean as possible. And I think that even just the mere optics of the dinner are so distracting. And I think they really undermine the fundamental premise of what we're supposed to be doing.
I understand. You and I talked yesterday when I think so many people were still in shock. I was sitting with Eugene in our D.C. bureau, who was there and who also has poured so much of himself into planning this dinner, into mentoring young journalists, into the incredible things that this dinner is supposed to represent, that people want it to be. But there is this tension right now between what we want it to be, what it traditionally has felt like, and just the reality of the moment that we're all living in. David, for you, how have you processed the imagery, the symbolism of that night? One of the things Molly pointed out to me yesterday was just that there is the gratitude, of course, everyone is safe, but there is also the reality, too, that we as journalists, we've covered so many shootings at which poor school children in Uvalde didn't have Secret Service people leaping over tables to rescue them. And we and our colleagues did. And I guess after you see and you experience and you understand something like this, what obligation do we have as an industry, as a profession, moving forward?
Well, there's a lot of jumbled emotions. I don't think we have to create a hierarchy of tragedies to acknowledge both the terrible anguish one feels, even unrelated to what happened to folks at Uvalde or at other school shootings or other mass shootings, as well as acknowledging the terror and the terribleness of what occurred on Saturday night. I was not present. I don't think we've seen the president fully grapple with what it is to be engaged in political rhetoric, which is in some ways inciting or affirming the idea of violence, or at least violent political rhetoric as part of everyday norm in public life. I think there is something to what Molly's talking about with the question of this very event. I haven't gone in over 2 decades. I don't blame those who do. I think it can be useful as well as fun. But I do think that there's a time where there's a lack of trust in the elites in American society, sometimes so-called elites, sometimes actually, but powerful figures in media and commerce and business and entertainment and politics, the highest level of politics altogether on this night. One was desperately hoping and gratified that there would be no actual violent acts occurred, and the one officer who was shot was protected by his protective gear, as we understand. But This is a moment where I think, it would be useful for rhetoric to be ratcheted down in all parts. And yet the idea that somehow some columnist somewhere, some blogger, somebody on Substack, somebody on cable news, on any of the networks, whatever flavor or variety you like, is responsible for this seems to me to be wide of the mark. I just think that there's far too much violent political rhetoric in public life right now. And I think it's become very accepted in kind of the conversational vernacular of podcasting and blogging and posting online and, getting things viral on TikTok and everywhere else. And at the same time, you've seen that filter down from the top and top echelons of government. And I think that I don't know that I blame that for what occurred Saturday night, but I sure would feel a lot more comfortable if the people in prominent positions in all of these institutions would behave themselves in a way one would want to see emulated rather than avoided.
Well, speaking of some of those implications and people in prominent positions, Molly, I want you to listen to some of Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's remarks earlier, implying the reporters critical of the president may have a role here in all of this.
Many people in this room, if we're going to be honest about it, have done it as well. They're just as guilty as a lot of people on X. When you have reporters, when you have media just being overly critical and calling the president horrible names for no reason and without evidence, without proof, it shouldn't surprise us that this type of rhetoric takes place.
Molly, are the people in that room, the reporters we know and we work with, are they just as guilty as a lot of people on X? I mean, we're at the very beginning of this investigation in the first place.
I mean, there are so many problems here. I mean, one is that we do have a First Amendment, and the idea that speech is somehow violence is, pretty nutty. And remember, we're in a country that has a major mass shooting and gun problem. So, that would be where I would start if I wanted to stop violence. That seems like a very easy one. But the second thing I would say is, he is standing next to a woman who was a host on Fox News, okay? And there are numerous members in this administration who have been on Fox News.
The Trump administration is once again going after a certain late-night comedian, ramping up pressure on Jimmy Kimmel, ABC, and ABC's parent company, Disney, in an unprecedented push that critics warn is about retribution more so than any real policy. Today, federal regulators ordering a review of all station licenses owned by ABC. The Times calling the FCC's action an extraordinary move as it intensifies efforts to punish major media outlets for their coverage. It comes just a day after Trump renewed calls for ABC to fire Kimmel over a parody of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That segment aired 2 days before the events of Saturday. Here's the portion that Trump and the First Lady objected to.
Our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow. Melania's birthday is on Sunday. That's right. She's planning to celebrate at home the same way she always does, looking out a window and whispering, "What have I done?"
Last night, Kimmel returned to his show and defended the joke while also condemning political violence.
It was a pretend roast. I said, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at her, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow, which obviously was a joke about their age difference and the look of joy we see on her face every time they're together. He's almost 80 and she's younger than I am. It was not by any stretch of the definition a call to assassination, and they know that. I've been very vocal for many years speaking out against gun violence in particular.
This is round two for Trump and Kimmel. ABC pulled Kimmel from the airwaves for 6 days back in September. It followed pressure from the Trump administration over Kimmel's comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk. His suspension faced massive backlash. Hollywood heavyweights like Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, and Jennifer Aniston all backing Kimmel. Many people showed their support by canceling their Disney Plus accounts, too. And it's not just Kimmel. The president likes to take credit for the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show. In his second term, he's gone after a whole range of networks, newspapers, and media figures, from The Times and CBS to The Wall Street Journal, BBC, Disney, and more. Joining me now is Jason Selvig, actor, comedian, and one half of the political comedy duo The Good Liars. Jason, it's good to have you. I think I remember talking to you around the first Jimmy Kimmel versus Trump battle royale. And there was this joke on Twitter about how much resentment some people had over the fact that this administration had put them in a position where they were having to say things like, protect Jimmy Kimmel.
I stand with Jimmy Kimmel.
With Jimmy Kimmel. And I guess I'm back there again today. Are you surprised?
I mean, am I surprised? No. I mean, Donald Trump has like an enemies list. We know that. I guess I'm surprised with just the reaction of the American people after the first round of this. Trump is using the federal government to go after late night comedians. It's so silly. It's all because he can't take a joke. I mean, these comedians are making fun of him. He's the president of the United States. Late night comedians always make fun of the president. And he is so sensitive that when the crowd laughs at him, he can't take it. And look, I'm on Jimmy Kimmel's side. Like, he is making jokes about somebody who should be made fun of. Like Donald Trump, he acts like he's this big, tough alpha guy. And then he puts his name on buildings, his face on buildings, his face on passports, coins, the Trump cards. But then he picks a fight with a late night comedian, several late night comedians, over jokes being told about him. And I do think it's a little strange that Donald Trump has been harsher on Jimmy Kimmel than he has on Ghislaine Maxwell. He's had worse things to say about Jimmy Kimmel than Ghislaine Maxwell. He wished her well in 2020 and kind of like brushes off the questions about pardoning her. It's a very odd thing. It's a very odd use of presidential power to be like, this is the major problem with the country right now. Late night comedians, even though gas prices are over $4 a gallon. It's very, very strange.
So I have to ask then, so, you know, you work in this space, you are a comedian, and you are very much in the political fray. I mean, you go to Donald Trump's events. Have you found yourself over the course of the last year, like self-censoring, editing a joke? Because, I mean, even though it's funny, I guess, to laugh at it, he's trying this whole thing again. It's probably actually going to like give Kimmel another boost and bump and add another tail to his career. But like, he is trying to persecute comedians in this environment.
No, and it's very strange that he's doing that. This is the use of presidential power. It's like we've got the midterms coming up right now, and he thinks that the biggest issue is late night comedians and building a big ballroom. Like, that's his pitch right now, which is very, very strange. But me personally, like, I think Donald Trump, he's surrounded by people who are trying to protect his ego, like, more than anything. And I think that's funny, and I think it should be made fun of. So I don't think it's like this is like a heroic thing, but I think most comedians are looking at this now more with Donald Trump and rolling their eyes at him, being like, we're doing this again. And I think all the polls are showing that the American public kind of feel the same way. That they're like, this is what you're doing with your time. We're at war right now, and this is what you're doing with your time. It's very, very strange.
Well, it did not stop Attorney General Blanche and Kash Patel from coming forward today about a seashell post
I know.
James Comey.
Taking a picture of that and putting it on there. Meanwhile, there were right-wing pundits who had 86-46 and posted that before. And I don't know, are they going to go after them, too, for threats against Joe Biden? I'm not holding my breath for that.
What do you think it says about who we are as a country right now when you have this story of the sort of comedians under the microscope right now? At the same time, after what happened on Saturday, we have a country like awash in conspiracy theory. And I ask you about those two things in connection because to me it sort of reads as people are trying to escape into these different spaces, whether that is a joke or whether that is like this rejection that the world and our reality could be this crazy that instead you are going to live with a tinfoil hat on. And I'm curious if you see all these things as connected too.
I mean, I think it is all connected with everyone losing their minds a little bit right now. And I think we've gone to a lot of Trump rallies and we talked to people who would say conspiracy theories like JFK Jr. is alive and well. Sometimes JFK Sr. is alive and well. Biden was replaced by a body double. Somebody said Biden was replaced by Jim Carrey.
The greatest hits.
Yeah, the greatest hits. But now I think we're seeing some stuff on the left where it's the jumping to the conclusion of it and then accepting that as fact before seeing the actual facts. And I think that's a little scary because to jump to that conclusion within a few minutes of a news story breaking, that's not healthy. I think you want to take everything in and think about like what actually happened and see the facts of it before you jump to a conclusion and say some outlandish conspiracy theory is true. So in a way, it like reminds me a little bit of stuff that I've seen at Trump rallies when you see some of the really out there conspiracy theories on the left.
Donald Trump is trying to get late-night comedian Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air again. Today, Trump's SEC chairman Brendan Carr took the unprecedented step of threatening Disney's broadcast licenses by bringing them under an early review. The Trump administration claims this is part of its investigation into diversity, equity, inclusion at Disney, but it's widely understood as retaliation for this joke that Jimmy Kimmel made last Thursday, 2 days before the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Of course, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow.
Yesterday, the First Lady put out a statement demanding Kimmel be fired. Here's how Kimmel responded on his show last night.
Obviously was a joke about their age difference and the look of joy we see on her face every time they're together. It was a very light roast joke about the fact that he's almost 80 and she's younger than I am. It was not by any stretch of the definition a call to assassination, and they know that. I've been very vocal for many years speaking out against gun violence in particular, but I understand that the First Lady had a stressful experience over the weekend, and probably every weekend is pretty stressful in that house. And also, I agree that hateful and violent rhetoric is something we should reject. I do, and I think a great place to start to dial that back would be to have a conversation with your husband about it, because, by the way, I also should point out, Donald Trump is allowed to say whatever he wants to say, as are you, and as am I, as are all of us, because under the First Amendment, we have, as Americans, a right to free speech.
Anna Gomez serves as a commissioner of the SEC. She was appointed by Joe Biden in 2023. She's spoken out about and against today's decision, and she joins me now. Commissioner, it's good to have you on the program. Obviously, the FCC is a bipartisan, structurally bipartisan entity with a majority appointed by the sitting president, the chair, Brendan Carr, obviously appointed by Trump. Can you just start with what technically happened today? Because my understanding is in the past, there's been what we might call jawboning. There might be threats, we're going to block this, but there was actually like a regulatory action taken today. What was it?
Yes, hi, it's good to be with you. Well, what we saw today was the White House called for the silencing of a vocal critic, and the FCC answered that call. What the FCC did today was it issued an order to start the renewal process for Disney-owned local broadcast stations. And that renewal process is years in advance of when that was supposed to happen. But this is all just as an excuse in order to retaliate against voices that this administration opposes.
The last time this happened, in some respects, I would say one of the mistakes Brendan Carr made, from my reading on it, other than the substance, was to explicitly say what he was doing. And I'll play you what he said the last time they tried to cancel Kimmel about the role that he was going to play. Take a listen. This is the chair of the FCC.
Frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
Basically saying, look, get rid of Kimmel or we're going to come after you regulatorily. Today, this is all cloaked in some DEI investigation. Do you credit that at all, or is this obviously pretextual?
Oh, this is an outrageous assault on the freedom of speech by this FCC in order to retaliate against Disney and against the critics of this administration. It is unprecedented, it is unlawful, and it is bound to fail. So Disney should push back because Disney has the First Amendment on its side, and it will win against this FCC action.
What do you mean by that? When you say it's bound to fail, like there's regulatory steps, there's court. What is a recourse here for a corporation that's obviously been targeted for protected speech.
Yes, there is a process that this renewal process that the FCC goes through. And the FCC is clearly trying to target Disney to actually harm it. It will go through this process. It's a years-long process that involves various levels of review, including a final vote by the commission, if in fact the commission decides not to renew these local broadcaster licenses. Then it goes to court because Disney would presumably appeal such an action. And it's important to note that through all of this time, ABC will still be able to operate its licenses. So this threat is really just about the process and about putting Disney through the pain of having to defend its licenses and its local licenses. And I just want to point out to you, there really is a rich irony here that this is an action taken to retaliate against a bit about an event that is about honoring freedom of speech, but is instead being used as an excuse to curtail that very freedom. And it's absolutely antithetical to what our First Amendment is all about.
The FCC, like other boards, right, the Federal Elections Commission and a bunch of other ones, you know, they have these kind of structures where they're bipartisan, but there's a majority. I mean, what is your relationship with Brendan Carr like? I mean, when you see this, can you call him up and be like, this is ridiculous, this is wrong, why are you doing this?
Well, I don't talk about my conversations with my colleagues, but yes, we are a board, a bipartisan board. There's only 3 of us right now. There's 2 vacancies, and we work on matters together. We often actually agree. There's a lot that the FCC does that doesn't involve curtailing the freedom of speech, but instead involves valid goals like protecting national security or making sure that we have a spectrum needed for new and innovative services. And so we work together to make sure that we can advance the public interest in general, pursuant to what Congress tells us to do. What Congress explicitly told us not to do is to censor broadcasters.
How important is it to you for the free speech in this country and the liberties that all of us as Americans, I think, are proud of or aspire to, that this not be allowed to work in this case?
It is so important for our democracy that we not allow this administration to weaponize the FCC or any of its other agencies under its control to curtail our freedoms. And freedom of speech is so important. Freedom of the press, of course, the Fourth Estate, is so important to hold power to account. And so it's really important that the broadcasters push back against this, because as we have learned, capitulation does not lead to protection for that particular broadcaster. We've seen already how this administration has tried to retaliate against broadcasters and how it continues to come back to demand more. So we are at an inflection point right now. Broadcasters can make a decision. They can push to protect the freedom of speech, or they can surrender it. So I am happy to see that Disney has said that it will, in fact, fight this, and it should fight this because it will win.
Ana Gomez, Commissioner on the Federal Communications Commission. Thank you so much for making some time for us today.
Thank you.
Trump's attempt to use this attack to justify his ballroom is clearly absurd. But again, it's just one of several pet projects Trump is laser focused on right now. As I mentioned, Trump is also now using the attack in his never-ending effort to get comedian Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air. And today, Trump's FCC director ordered a new review of the licenses for ABC Disney over this joke Kimmel made the 2 days prior to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where he pretended he was hosting the event.
And of course, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow.
Now, again, Kimmel made that joke on Thursday, in part because they weren't going to have a comedian at the dinner, 2 days before anyone knew that a gunman would show up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And it's clear that the joke is about Trump's age. There's a 24-year age gap difference between Trump and Melania. It's not a call for violence against the president. I Because Donald Trump is always ready and willing to underscore the absurdity of his own actions, he literally made a similar joke himself just today at his event with King Charles while talking about the length of his parents' marriage.
They were married for 63 years. And excuse me, if you don't mind. That's a record we won't be able to match, darling. I'm sorry. Just not going to work out that way. We'll do well, but we're not going to do that well. 63 years.
It's basically just a different joke about his age. And Jimmy Kimmel told a version of it before we knew there would be an attack on the White House Correspondents' Dinner. No reasonable person would think Kimmel was somehow calling for political violence, just like no reasonable person would think Caroline Leavitt was talking about actual gunshots when she said this right before the Correspondents' Dinner took place.
I will tell you, this speech tonight will be classic Donald J. Trump. It'll be funny. It'll be entertaining. There will be some shots fired tonight in the room. So everyone should tune in.
I mean, by their standards, maybe the FCC chairman should investigate. I'm obviously kidding, but that's really the logic they're using to go after Jimmy Kimmel. And if you think that's a stretch, just wait, because the Trump administration has put a lot of imagination into using this moment to go after another one of Trump's perceived enemies. Today, the Trump administration once again decided to indict former FBI Director James Comey. And you may remember that Trump's first attempt to indict Comey for lying to Congress fell apart thanks to thin evidence and the incompetence of Trump's handpicked prosecutor. So you would think that Trump's Justice Department would make sure they had something really, really strong to charge Comey with the second time around, right? Well, behold, this is the crime that the Trump administration claims Comey committed. This social media post of seashells that spell out 86-47. 86 is, of course, restaurant jargon for cancel and order, and Donald Trump is the 47th president. So naturally, the Trump administration had determined that this social media post represents a direct threat to end Donald Trump's life. Seriously, that is their argument. Now, James Comey has said explicitly that he did not intend this as a threat against the president's life. And let's be honest, no right-minded person would interpret this as a threat against the president's life. During the Biden administration, conservative influencers were posting 86-46. He was, of course, the 46th president, to express their discontent with the president, and nobody prosecuted them. Conservative T-shirt vendors even sold impeach Biden T-shirts that said 86-46 on them. You can still buy them on Amazon today. But the Trump administration, the Justice Department says that this Instagram post from James Comey is a legitimate threat against Trump's life. And they say they are ready to take that argument into a U.S. courtroom.
How will you prove intent when, as the director had acknowledged, Mr. Comey said he did not associate 86 with doing harm, and he took it down promptly, said it was political speech, not an intent to harm the president?
How do you prove intent in any case? You prove intent with witnesses, with documents, with the defendant himself to the extent it's appropriate, and that's how we'll prove intent in this case.
Witnesses and documents? What witnesses and documents? There are no witnesses and documents mentioned in the DOJ's two-page indictment. All of this, we're talking about seashells on a beach. All of this is just so ridiculous. We know what this is really about because Donald Trump has already tried to get James Comey indicted for something completely different. I mean, how stupid do they think the American people are? Does anyone really believe James Comey was threatening Donald Trump's life with an Instagram post of some seashells? Does anyone really believe that Jimmy Kimmel was threatening Trump's life in a comedy sketch on live TV 2 days before the White House Correspondents' Dinner? Does anyone really believe that Trump has spent the last few months fixating on drapes and finishes for his big ballroom renovation because he was so concerned about national security? This is all just a blatant attempt to use a real attack as pretext for the stuff Trump already wanted to do. I mean, this is the second time he's gone after both Kimmel and Comey. The question now is, how should we respond to a president using real threats of violence to indulge his own obsessions?
The New York Times noted in looking at this case, how this could play out for ABC, saying it is extremely difficult for the government to take away a station's right to broadcast. It must be able to make a convincing case that the stations had shown a pattern of violating rules and regulations. And that speaks to what you were saying just now. Even if the FCC ultimately decides to block the renewal of ABC station licenses, the network would have ample recourse in the courts, and it would be able to continue to broadcast as the fight played out. So that becomes an expense for them, which, you know, they have to calculate they want to go through. I suspect they would. I don't see them backing down. But there's also, because they would be continued to broadcast, the Jimmy Kimmels of the world will still be on the air. And so you have these narratives that would continue that they're trying to squash.
Yeah, but I think, you know, you really put your finger on it, which is, I don't think this is actually about ultimately getting the license.
Right.
I think it is actually about harassing a company so that other companies will think twice about speech and will, you know, might censor themselves more. Disney has a lot of resources. Other companies have less resources. So I think the truth of all of this is when we step back, we should recognize that this administration is using the FCC to do the vendetta bidding of the President of the United States. It is using an arm of the administration that is supposed to actually be conscious of our First Amendment rights and totally quashing them. So basically attacking an institution trying to punish Disney for the speech of a comedian. This is something that, you know, we wouldn't be surprised if it happened in Putin's Russia or would have happened in Orban's Hungary. But people rose up there and against this kind of action, and we should do the same here.
New in Donald Trump's crackdown on freedom of speech, today making an explicit threat against comedian Jimmy Kimmel, asking when Disney would fire him and that it, quote, better be soon. That following a new FCC investigation of ABC and Disney with their broadcasting licenses at risk. Bloomberg reporting, quote, although the license review order cites potential workplace discrimination as the reason for scrutiny, people familiar with the matter said it was precipitated by President Donald Trump's plea for ABC to fire late-night host Jimmy Kimmel. FCC Chair Brendan Carr was asked about the investigation today. Watch.
And then will the Jimmy Kimmel, will that all, or any speech issues be part of this review? Is it solely restricted to DEI, the early license reviews?
Our DEI review is going to continue, and it's going to be part of that. Disney, as part of the filing, is going to have to come in and demonstrate that they've been operating in the public interest.
Now, that's not exactly a clear denial, as critics believe that Trump is using the levers of government to punish Kimmel. You'll recall this is Kimmel's second clash with Trump and the FCC after he was suspended and then reinstated last fall after public outcry, both times because Trump didn't like Kimmel's jokes. But Kimmel is not backing down. Our
first couple, Donald and Melania, who lately have seemed closer than ever, and I like to think I played a part in that. Can we maybe get him one of those bricks that locks him out of his phone between the hours of midnight and 6?
Now, this latest Kimmel conflict, part of Trump's broad attempts to crack down on freedom of expression in this country, as The Atlantic reports, quote, in marshaling regulatory power against ABC and Disney, FCC Chair Carr has given the White House another way to extend control over the media. All of this as a new global report shows that press freedom in the United States is declining. The annual World Press Freedom Index from the organization Reporters Without Borders is now ranking the United States at 64, sliding down 7 spots. Their report citing Donald Trump's leadership as a key factor in their ranking, turning his, quote, repeated attacks on the press and journalists into a systemic policy. Joining me now is David Litt, former speechwriter for President Obama and author of the Word Salad Substack, and Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University. It's great to have both of you with us. So the last time, David, that Donald Trump went up against Jimmy Kimmel, he lost. There was a moment of pause. No doubt there was a lot of pressure that was leveled against ABC and Disney by the affiliates and others. But in the end, we can say for now, freedom of speech prevailed. Jimmy Kimmel was reinstated. How do you see it playing out this time?
Well, I don't want to make predictions, especially about the future. But what I will say is it feels like with the Iran war going poorly, the Trump administration has decided to open a second front and redo the war with Jimmy Kimmel. And I think that this is a president who always needs grievance. He always needs someone to bully. But I think what's really interesting this time is Disney last time around caved immediately, and then they kind of uncaved after a public outcry. We'll see what happens, but this time around, Disney is not, as Trump is complaining about, firing Jimmy Kimmel right off the bat. And so what you see is maybe a sign that some of these corporations are starting to weigh this out and say, hey, this is more bluster than we thought, and the cost of cooperating with this guy is actually higher than the cost of going along with it.
Yeah, for the most part, Christina, the companies have been going along with Trump. When you think of like the settlements that have been made, when you hear Pete Hegseth talking about he can't wait for Larry Ellison to own CNN so he can get favorable coverage of the Iran war. So how do you read this moment in time? The U.S. is sliding down that press freedom index, 64, sliding down, 7 from last year. But at the same time, we're seeing this, as they described it, systemic policy to attack the media.
Right. So really quickly, Eamon, it's Israel and U.S. war on Iran. And I think that that's part of the issue that this administration is really frustrated with, because so many Americans are recognizing there is no leadership and guidance in this administration. Trump 2.0 is just off the rails. And so, to David's point, a lot of Americans are saying, you're focusing on all the wrong things. You're attacking Jimmy Kimmel and ABC and demanding essentially shakedowns. What about my gas prices?
Right.
What about housing? What about what's going on at the grocery store? So this misguided 2.0 administration is really, I think, frustrating a lot of Trump supporters. And if we think about the three branches of government, we've seen Trump sort of take over the executive in a dictatorial sense. We've seen him bully Congress into essentially a feckless institution, even though it's unified government. We've seen the courts essentially acquiesce and give him whatever he wants. So if we have this sort of fourth arm that's the media, he wants to take over that as well. And I think slowly but surely he's eroded quite a bit. We've seen CBS acquiesce in many ways, lots of other institutions. But I think some are saying, we can't give you everything you want, because it's actually quite ridiculous that we would fire someone for a joke that was made well before an incident on Saturday.
Yeah, he didn't even know about the incident, obviously, and so that was the whole issue here. Stephen Miller's wife on her podcast yesterday hosted Brendan Carr. And it's interesting to see how the FCC has evolved here. I don't think most Americans knew about the FCC a couple years ago, and yet somehow has become weaponized by Donald Trump in his kind of pursuit of controlling the media. Take a listen to what he said.
Look at the changes over the last couple of years that I think are attributable to Trump running at the fake news media. You've got NPR defunded. You've got PBS defunded. You've got CBS having new ownership. CNN is getting new ownership. So it's a big ship to turn, but I think things are heading in the right direction.
So he's saying the quiet part out loud, right? I mean, I guess, for us in the media who are following this, it is an attempt by the administration to take control of the media one way or the other. Brendan Carr, the chair of this FCC commission, came out and explicitly said what this was all about.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, it's amazing to me that what used to be the party of small government is now the party of, who the chair of the Federal Communications Commission is, right? Like, that is government interference on a level.
Well, they're also buying Spirit Airlines and taking control of that.
Yeah,
but that's another issue.
Well, but I think it's the same issue, actually. Yeah. All of these things coming together where Trump and his administration say, we want government control. We want our hands in everything. Yeah. And as you pointed out, right, they're not even ashamed to admit it. They're not even pretending they're doing something different right now. And I think that is, on one hand, it is incredibly dangerous. And on the other hand, I do think that something that gives me a lot of hope is the American people don't like it. Fundamentally, we don't want government in our lives in that way. And interestingly, it's not just Republicans or Democrats who are saying so. Most Americans feel like that.
So a very important point. Most Americans are saying they don't like it. The question is, what guardrails do we have? What should be done to make sure that another Brendan Carr, if we survive this one, if our democracy survives it, if our media landscape survives what he's doing with Donald Trump, comes out on the other side with a stronger, more vibrant, more independent media landscape?
Yeah, I think if and when the Democrats take control of the House and possibly even the Senate, because of the draconian policies that we're seeing out of the Trump administration, they're going to have to figure out ways to shore up and secure certain institutions. We've realized during the first and second iteration of Donald Trump, so many things that we thought were hard and fast laws even or rules are just gentlemen's agreements. They're norms that most people followed, but he has thrown them out of the window. And so when so many Democrats and independents are clamoring for a party that is not just against Donald Trump, but a party that wants to do something, these are some of the things that Democrats can say they're going to do to protect our media, to protect the flow of information, to make sure that we can't have another Republican or whomever come after Donald Trump and try and take away civil rights and civil liberties.
You brought up the way the Trump administration is potentially trying to shift the narrative away from the Iran war. Take a listen to how he talked about it in the Oval Office today, the Iran war. Watch.
I see in that stupid CNN, which I only watch because you have to watch a little bit of the enemy, so I watch it for a very short period. But you have to, you have to be smart. And if you see CNN, you think they're winning the war. If you read the New York Times, it's actually seditious, in my opinion.
So him calling the media enemy of the people is nothing new. Him referring to it there as the enemy is nothing new. But using the word seditious to describe what the New York Times is doing seems to be yet another threshold that has been crossed.
Yeah, I mean, we were here on Saturday night, right? And during the coverage of that, and in the wake of that assassination attempt, you saw predictably Trump and other Republicans saying we've got to tone down the rhetoric, and saying it's Democrats who are demonizing their opponents. Now, I agree, political violence is wrong, and the rhetoric that encourages it is bad. But to call media organizations like the New York Times seditious just a few days after telling people to tone down the rhetoric, we're not surprised by the hypocrisy anymore, but we should still be outraged by it.